Welcome to the Friday subscribers only edition of the Hub Dialogues, the podcast of the Hub, Canada's leading source for insight and analysis into the big issues and ideas driving the public conversation. On these special Friday only broadcasts, we're going to be convening Sean Speer, our editor-at-large, and Stuart Thompson, our editor-in-chief, for a conversation with me, Rudyard Griffiths, about the big stories and issues that have animated the public conversation over the last 7 days. Our goal is to leave you with some new analysis and insights, and hopefully some new perspectives on the big issues of our time. So pull up a chair right now and join Sean Speer, Stuart Thompson, and myself for the Friday subscriber-only edition of the Hub Dialogues. Stuart, Sean, great to be in conversation with you again on this Friday. What are we, guys? We are the 5th of August. Wow. Summer is ticking. I say that every week, but it just freaks me out, guys, how fast this is going. I mean, you're talking Labor Day in 4 weeks. God.
You got to stop doing this to me, man. I hate it so much.
So, Stuart, you were getting back on the road after an injury. You said you were going to do 15K last weekend. Come on, give us some times. You know, what were the 5K split times? Your 1Ks for.
You know, what's funny is I'm so slow right now because I haven't been running that I can't wear my Garmin watch. I'm so slow that I can't even look at the times. So I've just been out in the woods running around like with nothing on. It's great.
You understandably, listeners, he had his shorts and his shirt on because we're not into shirtless running here, let alone shortless running.
They call the non-GPS running naked running, which does cause some confusion in the running world.
And Sean, you had promised to match Stuart beer for kilometer last weekend. I don't know. Are you making any progress on that?
I over-delivered, I assure you. Now, how about you though? Are you finally childless over there? And if so,
I am.
What's going on in the Griffiths household?
I got 2 kids at camp. It's date night every night. It's awesome. It's weird though. I do miss my kids. You know, it's funny. You kind of think, wow, I'm sure this is the first time I've got both of them out of the house for 10 days, but I guess that's the weird thing about parenthood. You love them and you don't kind of get off the hook. Even when they're not here, they're kind of on your mind. So looking forward to getting them back next week and kind of rounding out the summer. But we've got an action-packed show. The summer is not letting up for the Hub Roundtable in terms of topics for us to cover. So a double-barreled show this week. I want to first dig into the center ice conservatives event that's coming up. The Hub's going to be there to cover it. Some great reporting today by Jeff Russ in your Hub email or on our website. And also just talk about how this, kind of what's making the party anxious at this moment. Is it the center ice kind of centrists in the party, or is it frankly some increasingly batty stuff that we're seeing out? I don't even know if it's right to call it the social conservative wing. Maybe it's a new wing, a new horn, antediluvian tail that the party is growing, but we can talk about that. And in the back half of the show, guys, we got to talk about China. So much going on there. And I know Sean has some very, very strong views on China that I want to probe with him. So Stuart, kick us off with a quick summary of Jeff Russ's piece today on the center ice conservatives. Maybe this is new to some people. What is this group? What are they trying to do? I thought Jeff had some terrific reporting.
Yeah, one of the great things about having a reporter on the staff now is that we were actually asking this question on our roundtable is, the center ice conservatives have said they want to bring some kind of moderate conservative voice to the party. And our question was, well, what is that? What is a moderate conservative now? Like if they're reacting to Poilievre, he's pro-choice and he's pretty conventional on most of his stuff. So what are they going to do to differentiate themselves? And the piece is really interesting because it is actually still hard to figure that out. They have some Charest team representation on there, but it's not an entirely Charest movement. Jeff talked to Brian Brulot, who's a Poilievre supporter, and he actually made the case that a sort of measured populism can go along with centrism. So I think it's quite interesting. I think what maybe they're trying to do here is bring down, the heat level a little bit, and maybe have some more kind of temperamentally conservative ideas, which is more about just, persuading people rather than yelling at them. And I think we've kind of made fun of that idea in the past. Well, I mean, I've made fun of that in the past on this podcast, but I think there's something to that. I think maybe temperament is important when it comes to politics. And my sense from all of the quotes in the piece is that they are just looking to take down the temperature a little bit.
So, Sean, is that a viable path, to keep this party united? We talked last week about Stephen Harper's endorsement of Pierre Poilievre in that context, to try to come out at the other end of this meat grinder of a leadership with the united party. But I guess I just challenge whether, there are some issues that are points of real cleavage, for instance, vaccine mandates. For some people, that is, a Rubicon. So I'm happy to enthusiastically paddle across it and, arrive at the other shore and shout back at the people that are not going to go, into Rome, so to speak, and oppose vaccine mandates. And let's remember that Pierre Poilievre was even, in a sense, more emphatic. He said, now I don't know if this is actually ever translated into a workable policy, but no vaccine mandates in the future, regardless of, in a sense, circumstances. Like this as a policy approach is off the table in his government. So I challenge you, Sean, whether there are real cleavages here or whether Humpty Dumpty can be put back together again with some soothing words and some, I guess, consensus around the broad planks of a conservative agenda.
Yeah, I've been a bit of a skeptic about the claims of fracturing and even disunion of the Conservative Party of Canada, and I would put three reasons on the table. The first is that Poilievre is a unique potential leader in the sense that his credentials as a conservative are so rock solid amongst core conservative voters. There is so much built up trust and credibility there, not just because what he's done in the campaign, but because of his track record, that I think he might counterintuitively have more scope for a kind of pivot on some of these different issues than, say, Aaron O'Toole did, where I think core conservative voters had a more skepticism or suspicion about O'Toole as a kind of true blue conservative, as he famously put it in the last leadership campaign. So in that sense, Poilievre's rock solid conservatism may actually be a source of flexibility. It's the kind of quintessential Nixon goes to China opportunity. The second point I would make is that, and this is a terribly important one, is that, well, these different factions of the conservative movement may have disagreements on the margin. The one thing that they fundamentally agree on is that they don't like Justin Trudeau. And I wouldn't underestimate the kind of unifying and animating value of a shared opponent. And what makes the Trudeau government particularly unifying from a conservative point of view is really across the policy spectrum, whether it's on the government's skepticism of free markets, which of course is alienating kind of economic conservatism, or its aversion to kind of traditional values or traditional norms, which is alienating social conservatives, to say nothing of some of these pandemic issues. Opposition to the Trudeau government and to the Prime Minister himself in particular, it seems to me, will transcend any of these fissures or disagreements within conservatism. And then just let me make one final point, guys, because I think this is sometimes underappreciated. The Conservative Party of Canada has now been part of our political landscape for more than 15 years. If you came of age politically in those early days, the truth is you don't really even have any attachment to the old legacy parties. There are only two Conservative MPs presently sitting in the House of Commons who ran under a Progressive Conservative or Reform or Canadian Alliance Party banner. So I do think the Conservative Party has sort of established itself as a durable political institution. And I think that the challenge for Poilievre, assuming he wins, will be to galvanize those core voters and then start to build with a broader share of the Canadian public.
Hey, great analysis. So Stuart, taking kind of Sean's 3 points there, I guess, what is the center ice group trying to accomplish? Have you and Jeff figured that out? Like, is it to try to give the Charest campaign a boost? I don't know. Is it to put a marker down with the Poilievre, machinery that's now developed and will soon take over the party, lock, stock, and barrel? I guess I'm just trying to understand what the strategy is here, other than having a nice conference and people listening to speeches and going to dinners and doing all that good stuff.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the more interesting parts of this is that Sean and I have spoken before about how in the UK they have sort of actual factions within the caucus. So there'll be people, asserting their positions on, various issues and actually getting together to lobby for that within the Conservative Party caucus. That doesn't really happen in Canada. It's kind of one of those things that, either it happens informally or everyone just kind of sticks together. And one of the reasoning offered by one of these advisory council people was that that's what they're doing. They're advocating for a certain kind of policy within the party. Doesn't mean they want to split up the party. It doesn't mean they want to bring down the party or, upset Poilievre. They just want to argue for their policies that they like. And I think that's probably right. Like, in the end, this could either fizzle out or they could just be sort of an advocacy voice for certain ideas. That, to me, those are the two most likely possibilities here. And, I think maybe what this is, the best way to look at that is it's a hedge against Poilievre's sort of more extreme impulses towards, say, the truckers or towards the kind of rhetoric that I know they don't like. So I think maybe they're just trying to find some kind of counterbalance to that stuff.
Can I put a big idea on the table? And I'd be interested in Stuart and your reaction, Rudyard. There's been a lot of attention on the center-right conservatives movement and some of these moderate conservative voices in the mainstream media, including, of course, Tasha Keranen, who, in parentheses, we'll have on the podcast next Tuesday, so stay tuned. Part of me thinks that one of the reasons there's been such attention paid to this group is because a lot of people in the mainstream media broadly share their political preferences, and so this group has received disproportionate attention. But let me put this to you. I think the most interesting development in this leadership race is the role and place of social conservatives in the Conservative Party of Canada. In the first leadership race after Stephen Harper stepped down, social conservatives were a crucial part of Andrew Scheer ultimately winning the leadership. In the last leadership race, listeners will know that were it not for Quebec, Lesley-Ann Lewis would have been the leader of the Conservative Party because of the support and energy of social conservative voters. And what strikes me, guys, is in this leadership race, social conservatives have played a smaller role, even though they have ostensibly in Lewis a standard bearer. And my theory, hypothesis, and I'd be interested to hear what you think, is that for some reason, social conservatism, which has historically been associated with a key set of kind of flashpoint issues, including, of course, the question of abortion rights, seems to have shifted its focus to issues around the vaccines, mandates, the World Economic Forum, and so on, and kind of moved further and further away from the mainstream and away from those core issues that I do think have a lot of energy, if not within the Canadian public writ large, at least within conservative politics itself. So that's a long way of saying, in some ways, I think the media is missing the most important development in this race, which is the appearing diminishment of social conservatives as a key part of deciding who the next leader is going to be.
Yeah, and I mean, just to play three-dimensional chess for a moment, and if we take your hypotheses, and I actually agree with it, that social conservatives themselves, like every other group, have been impacted by this pandemic and have picked up, new torches to kind of bear. Vaccine mandates, obviously a big one. It's not simply WEF, World Economic Forum. It's this whole conspiracy theory around the Great Reset that seems to have, enthralled and captured a lot of people's mental headspace, I think, in a really, really kind of conspiratorial and in some ways kind of dark shades. And I talked about it last time. I'll talk about it again. There is an anti-Semitic tone to this Great Reset. And you can just go down that rabbit hole if you want on YouTube and find all kinds of references quickly to George Soros and the Rothschilds, the Illuminati. I mean, this stuff is really, really nuts. And I guess I would question, Stuart, whether, to pass this around the horn, so to speak, whether we're wrong to assume that these people have just agglomerated around Leslie Lewin. I mean, who are the 300,000 people that Pierre Poilievre has signed up? My sense, looking at some of them, I don't know what portion, but some of them are that, are in that constituency of full-blown, tin-hatted, conspiracy-wearing, swearing, angry voters who might in the past have been, as Sean said, staunch abortion rights supporters, maybe gun control was their big issue. They've migrated out the spectrum, like everyone has on the left too, to even more radical and extreme ideas, which then just brings me back to our event we're covering next week at the Hub, this centerized conservatives. I mean, maybe the worry here, Stuart, is what the heck is under the hood in terms of the party membership going forward. And there'll be policy conventions. These people, yes, will deal with the reality of a Canadian party where the leader is all powerful and paramount, but they're also in the party now. They're voting members. They're going to have says when it comes to putting policy ideas forward. That could cause a lot of headache, I think, for the party in the context of winning broader appeal amongst the Canadian electorate and not seeming extreme.
Yeah, I think for me, this is the fundamental question in our politics right now, which is that, my own example, I think, is probably worth using here, which is that last year, Ontario closed all the schools for seemingly arbitrary reasons. It was extremely frustrating for me as a parent of a young child. And then, you would sometimes mention that out loud and people would kind of get nervous around you that, you were going to go a little farther than that. And I've been looking at the polling on the trucker convoy, and it's very interesting because it's really kind of fluid. People have a lot of sympathy for the ideas of the trucker convoy. They just were not impressed with how they went about protesting. And I don't know the answer, so I'll say that right up front, that I don't know what percentage of these people are someone like me, who I would consider pretty normal in their politics and their opinions, who are just frustrated with governments that weren't listening to what actual experts were saying. They were listening to like teachers unions and people like that. Or is it this kind of conspiratorial side of things? I think there's two ways to look at this. One is that, we're online a lot and this stuff is very online. So there is a chance that maybe we're seeing more of it than is actually out there in the population. But the other thing is that I know in my gut there's something going on out there that we should be worried about, and it is infecting our politics. And the question for Poilievre, I think Jason Kenney also dealt with this in Alberta when he was dealing with people who were arguing for sovereignty and were so angry at Ottawa. He was trying to get sort of mainstream policies that would reflect their anger and sort of channel that through the normal channels. So I think Poilievre is trying to do something like that. He's going a little farther. I don't know if he's going too far. I've heard some people in the Conservative Party who think he is. But I think this is sort of a fundamental question right now. What's actually out there in our politics?
Great. We're going to cover that actually all next week, both a reporter at the Center Ice event, but more importantly, a series, I understand, guys, on kind of what is this identity in the party that, within the Conservative Party that could be kind of construed as centrist. What are its key planks? How does it differ from other factions and wings? So we're going to go kind of deep into the camps of the Conservative Party next week in the Hub with a series of essays and reporting. I'm really looking forward to that. So let's take a short break. When we're back on the other side, we're going to talk the Middle Kingdom, the Red Dragon. What's going on in the Straits of Taiwan? We'll have that for you right after this break. Rudyard Griffiths here, the Executive Director of the Hub. Thank you for listening to this, our Friday subscriber-only podcast. If you're enjoying this podcast and what the Hub is all about, providing insightful analysis and insights into the big issues and ideas facing Canada, all from a 100% Canadian perspective, please consider becoming a donor. You can do that right now at www.thehub.ca. Simply click on the button Donate. We'll send you a charitable tax receipt and a whole bunch of great benefits that come with being a Hub donor. Again, you can do that right now at www.thehub.ca. Thank you in advance for your generous contribution. Now back to our program. Hello, Hub listeners. You are tuned into the Friday Roundtable. I'm Rudyard Griffiths, the Executive Director of the Hub. I'm joined by Sean Speer, our Editor-at-Large, Stuart Thompson, our Editor-in-Chief. Guys, second half of the show, let's spend a bit of time on China. It's an issue that we've covered at the Hub extensively since our launch in April 2021. We find there's a lot of interest, a lot of engagement amongst the Hub community on China stories. China now front and center in the news with a set of major military drills around the island of Taiwan, in a sense, creating, some say, a game plan, a map, a rehearsal for how China potentially could blockade Taiwan, shutting it off from shipping, from, in a sense, the rest of the world, to assert China's sovereignty short of an invasion. Sean, let me come to you first. What is this moment that we're in right now? I mean, it's kind of interesting. I found the last few days the kind of China hawks have been a bit quiet. Maybe people are surprised at the extent of China's reaction to this. Are we seeing the precursors here for something bigger, a challenge on the horizon that for many of us was theoretical, a real face-off over Taiwan, to something that now looks like, if not inevitable, more and more likely with, forget each passing decade, we're now talking each passing year, month, you name it. This conflict between the United States and China over Taiwan seems to have shifted up a gear in the last few days.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's a bit of a moment for Western policymakers, Western leaders to, as you say, shift from the theoretical to the practical. What does this mean in terms of alliance building? What does this mean in terms of our past commitments to Taiwan? And how would we, in effect, operationalize those commitments in the face of some of the scenarios that you described? If listeners are looking for a kind of framework to think about these questions, I'd encourage them to listen to a past episode of Hub Dialogues with Elbridge Colby that I think is really solid. Elbridge is a former Trump administration official in the Department of Defense, someone who distinguished himself in the first decade of the 21st century by being something of a conservative skeptic of the Bush administration's so-called freedom agenda. And, in a nutshell, Colby's argument has always been that this is the main event, that China represents the West's main foe moving into the 21st century, and that the United States, Canada, and others really need to kind of rationalize their defense and foreign policy to ensure that we have the kind of resources and capacity to deal with this scenario. And I think, if channeling Colby, I think he would argue that for a whole host of reasons, including Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that we are really ill prepared for the current moment. And I don't think anyone is less prepared than Canada, where our foreign affairs establishment still seems stuck in a kind of early 21st century pose about how, if only we get more Starbucks and McDonald's in China, we're going to solve for all of our fundamental differences. And so one hopes that this is something of a wake-up call at the Pearson building in Ottawa, because we're moving from a kind of Cold War to an increasingly hot war.
Stuart, let's talk a little bit about Canada, because there were I'll give credit where credit's due, some great reporting in the Globe this week that the Liberal government has impaneled a group of experts. Governments do this from time to time when they're faced with challenges. In this case, the foreign policy challenge of dealing with China after the two Michaels. Reports coming out that this expert group is arguing vociferously over whether the words China should even be mentioned in the document. So this entire Indo-Pacific strategy seems to be kind of hanging in the balance right now at Fort Pearson, not in the context of whether we should have a more aggressive or assertive policy a la Australia vis-a-vis China, but even simply if we have the intestinal fortitude to mention the Middle Kingdom in the document. I mean, it seems like I don't know. I read that and I thought, whoa, what kind of, am I reading The Onion or is this the Globe and Mail? Like, what was your take on that?
Yeah, it made me think of Voldemort from Harry Potter, the he who should not be mentioned. And I think that's always a really bad thing when I mean, we have noticed this recently too, which is that we are not being seen as a serious player when it comes to China on the world stage. And other countries are starting to notice this. And I think we should be realistic about this, which is that there's going to be two sides here. It's going to be a multipolar situation. One of those sides is going to be China and allies, and the other one is going to be the US and allies. We're not going to get in on the China side, so we may as well be upfront about this. I think, you could understand this when the two Michaels situation was going on. I was always a little more understanding of this kind of stuff when we had two of our citizens in just a horrific situation. And, I could imagine being in that position of making decisions and potentially making it worse for those guys and having to talk to their wives or their families about that. But this kind of stuff doesn't make as much sense now, especially when all of our allies are going hard against China. Some of the stuff coming out of Australia and even the Biden administration, specifically the Biden administration, does not seem to take Canada seriously on this. And I think that's something we need to change. This morning, I had a piece published at the Hub, which is part of our, We Were Wrong series, admitting to things that we were wrong about. And I was thinking back to the Iraq War, which kind of formed my worldview on geopolitics. I was 20 years old when that happened. It seemed to me to be sort of an insane adventure in the Middle East. And I think I turned out to be right on that. But I think I overlearned that lesson, which is that it kind of gave me the sense that you can't do anything on the world stage, that most of these things, are just so hard to do that you shouldn't even try. Nation building is something different than this. So this is sort of standard diplomacy and geopolitics, and it's the kind of stuff that we have to get right.
Agreed. And I think it's important to separate out events like Iraq in terms of the challenge versus going up against what is increasingly a peer competitor in China, very different than Russia. And I guess that's my point, Sean, maybe get your thoughts on this. It seems like a bizarre strategy right now for Nancy Pelosi and now by default the Biden administration to lead the rest of the world, including Canada and its allies, seemingly into a two-front war with two of its major peer competitors, nuclear armed, Russia and China, to fight conflicts with both of them adjacent to their borders. Taiwan is 160 kilometers off the southern coast of China. Ukraine is right on the border of Russia, as we're learning. I don't know. I'm struggling here to understand the logic of this. And I'm the last person to be anti-American, but I worry here that there is just an ingrained at times hubris and overreach on the part of the Americans in terms of what they think they can and should do. They have a major fight with Russia right now. a major contest over the liberal international order. They've just, on a whim, allowed Nancy Pelosi to do 24 hours in Taiwan. And based on the scale and size and the remarks of Kirby, their defense secretary, their national security advisor, I think they're genuinely surprised at the scale and scope of the Chinese reaction and how aggressive it is. If you wanted to push the Chinese into the arms of the Russians, if you wanted to try to thwart your own strategy of preventing China from, I don't know, giving drones to Russia, giving other financial and economic assistance, well, you've just blown up that strategy for Nancy Pelosi's, 24-hour National Lampoon vacation in Taipei.
So I agree. And
I mean, it just seems strategically incoherent. And then it makes me a bit worried for Canada, because I agree with Stuart. At the end of the day, we're going to have to choose sides. We're going to have to choose the American side. We're not going to be part of the Chinese-Russian world. But what American world are we joining when they seem completely unable to execute, I don't know, what would just be common sense strategy of how to handle great power competitors?
Yeah. So I agree, and I disagree, at least for the purposes of podcast fodder. On the point, I agree with, the idea that this fundamental issue, one that really will likely define this century, which is to say the great power competition between the U.S. and China, that at this critical juncture, we've effectively outsourced our strategy to the American octogenarian speaker so that she can do a foreign policy vanity tour, just strikes me as crazy. So on that point, you won't find any disagreement. And in fact, I think it does, as you say, Rudyard, reflect a kind of decadence and unseriousness of the part of contemporary American politics that ought to concern our listeners. The part I would slightly disagree with is, I do think that we have to abide by our commitments to Taiwan moving forward in a world in which, as you say, the map is going to be increasingly divided between the kind of American sphere and the Chinese sphere. And this isn't just a geopolitical scenario either. This is a economic, a technological one as well. If the Americans, if the West more generally don't honor our commitments to Taiwan, the signal that sends to countries around the world in that scenario just strikes me as pushing a lot of countries that would otherwise side with us into the Chinese tent.
Sean, I agree 100%, but I wonder, is this the fight that you want to pick with China? We have to pick a fight with China. There are many ways to do that. We have to find ways to contain China. But again, there's just like an ahistoricism and frankly, like a Western myopia here. Like, remember, Taiwan was taken from China by force by colonial powers, including Japan. The rape of Nanking, okay? The Chinese do not like the Japanese. This was forcibly taken from them. And as the Chinese ambassador to the United States, I think it was Friday, in the Washington Post published a quote that I'll read to you. I think it's an interesting counterfactual. He says, to quote him, "Just think, if a U.S. state were to secede from America and declare independence, and then some other nation provided weapons and political support to that state, would the U.S. government or the American people allow this to happen?" You could ask the same question about Ukraine and Russia. There's something that America is doing here, which is just bizarre to me. You're right. You got to fight China intellectually, ideologically, technologically, economically. But to choose the military conflict where you're going to have to go all the way around to the other side of the world and fight a pure great power, nuclear armed, ballistic armed competitor 160 kilometers off their shore using naval power only. I'm all for doing difficult things. I'm all for people taking on ambitious challenges. Hey, what's the old U.S. Marine slogan? pain is weakness leaving the body. I don't know if this is now the strategic doctrine of the United States, but this just seems like the wrong fight to have.
Yeah, I'll just say this. One can disagree with commitments and statements that have been made, not just under the Biden administration, but successive administrations about the U.S. commitments to Taiwan. But now that it's been made, it doesn't mean we ought to abide by it stupidly in a kind of stupid way. But to walk away from Taiwan after the Biden administration walked away from Afghanistan, it just seems to me a signal.
Sean, we walked away from Hong Kong. We did it in a matter of weeks. Nothing happened. So why is Taiwan different? Why is it different? What's the intellectual difference, Sean, between Taiwan and Hong Kong? If anything, there's a case that Hong Kong was much more separate, from China due to British rule than Taiwan ever was. It was ruled by a dictator for 40 years, Chiang Kai-shek. I mean, come on, it's not.
I don't know, Rudyard. It just seems to me, as a kind of opening salvo in this new kind of bipolar world, taking a knee to China on this kind of fundamental question, it just doesn't bode well. It doesn't bode well for the kind of seriousness of the American political system, of the West's resolve that we were all lionizing in the immediacy of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and since has seemed to have taken a back seat to, whatever Kim Kardashian is doing, or, whatever else is going on Instagram. I do think that there are times when we're faced with these moments where we, as Charles Krauthammer famously put it, decline is a choice. And we've had a pretty good run where our generations have not been forced to make these types of difficult choices. And, I think what we saw over the past few days is the kind of laying of the groundwork of some difficult choices before us. And I'm not sure that American politics is up to the challenge. So on that point, I fundamentally agree.
Well, Stuart, I'll give you the last word in this mini debate that Sean and I have just had, but I would just lament the fact, if Canadian men and women end up, putting their lives in harm's way and possibly dying in the Straits of Taiwan for the independence of the Taiwanese, some could say that, would be an ennobling, struggle and death. But let's, at the end of the day, remember what this is really about. I mean, we are an ally. Canada is not isolated here. We could be dragged into this conflict. And I just don't think it's the right, I don't think it's the smart fight to have with China. The smart fight is to find ways economically, politically, technologically, to push off China's power as a pure competitor. It's not to poke the hedgehog, to go in as we are now with Nancy Pelosi's visit and just openly antagonizing the government in Beijing, basically disregarding the one China policy, which has served us amazing. It's arguably part of the rules-based international order. We're violating the rules-based international order. It just seems, I don't know, Stuart, what your view is, but I think the politics of this is radioactive. I think average Canadians would, if there actually was a conflict to break over Taiwan, would say, what? You're sending Canadian soldiers and sailors into the Straits of Taiwan to put their lives on the line for Taiwanese independence? I don't know how that's going to sell.
Yeah, the Elbridge Colby argument, which I think to me is a really interesting one, because I always saw him as sort of this hard-nosed realist. His argument is that we should be so committed to the defense of Taiwan that China sees it as an obvious failure if they try to do anything there. And that is a tempting way to think. But one of the things that I'm feeling humbled about after the Russian invasion of Ukraine is that I didn't expect Vladimir Putin to do what he did. And when you're talking about geopolitics, you're talking about different actors, and you don't always know exactly what they're willing to do or how much these things matter to them. And the thing that I didn't quite understand is either, it's hard to say with Putin, but is he kind of losing it, or is just Ukraine that important to Russians and to Putin himself? I'm not sure, but it turned out to be more important to him than I realized. I don't have a good scope on the Chinese either. So I think that's the thing that we really need to be very careful about. If we're committing to the defense of Taiwan with the idea that we would deter China, we should know for sure how much it matters to them.
Yeah, we should also realize this isn't going to be like, Band of Brothers and, people landing on the beaches of Taiwan as if it was D-Day. I mean, the Chinese, as they're right now, they're not simulating a land invasion. They're simulating a blockade. So imagine a scenario where the Chinese blockade Taiwan. Are we going to send the Sixth Fleet along with, Canadian naval support to transact the Straits of Taiwan as a Chinese blockade goes on, within 100 miles of, literally, as I understand it, thousands of Chinese ballistic missiles?
Even Colby says it's not worth dying for. It's not worth, American and Canadian people dying for. But if you're bluffing, you have to be ready for someone to call your bluff. And I think the Colby strategy is a big bluff. And a lot of this is bluffing that we need to be super careful about. That's
a good point. Sean, do you want a last kick in the can? I've monopolized this section, I know, but I'm a bit excised this week about this. I just think we're dangerously veering into kind of doctrinal hubris at a moment when all eyes should be on Ukraine and Russia and a pretty urgent fight over the liberal international order that's going on right there, as opposed to picking another one.
Well, as we wrap up, let me try to tie together our two conversations today and lead into next week's Hub content. One of the things, Rudyard and Stewart, that held conservative politics together in the Anglosphere through much of the second half of the 20th century was a common enemy in the Soviet Union and communism. And one of the reasons we've seen fracturing and conflict within conservative politics, broadly speaking, has been the absence of that common opponent ideologically and strategically. And one wonders if China maybe helps to coalesce conservatives around commitments to free markets, commitments to space for religious expression, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is something that was reflected in the Conservative Party's platform in 2021, or a kind of robust agenda with respect to China. And one wonders if that will continue to be a key part of the kind of conservative orthodoxy as a kind of glue to hold together these different parts of the movement. Stay tuned for next week's content. As Rudyard says, these and other issues will be covered as we try to understand what's going on within the world of big C and small c conservatism in Canada.
Awesome, guys. Have a great weekend. We'll do this all again next Friday for Hub subscribers, and tune into our web and podcast editions teeing up for you all next week. Thank you for listening to this special Friday edition of the Hub Dialogues for subscribers only. I hope you've enjoyed the program. If you have a comment or suggestion about the show, an issue, a topic, an idea that you'd like us to cover on our regular Friday subscriber-only Hub Dialogues, please send us an email to info@thehub.ca. Also, check out our website, www.thehub.ca, for tons of great analysis and insights about the big issues and ideas shaping our world and Canada's future. While you're there, if you'd like to, consider becoming a donor. We'd love to have your support. Simply click on the donate button. We'll send you a charitable tax receipt, and you'll get a whole series of great benefits and perks that come with being a Hub donor. This edition and every edition of the Friday subscriber-only Hub Dialogues are produced by Ricky Gerwitz. I'm Rudyard Griffiths, the Executive Director of the Hub. Talk to you again next Friday. Bye-bye.